All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Zachary Dickinson here. Hope it all has been a wonderful week, a wonderful start to the weekend of rest and relaxation. I have work day, so not really much of that, but I do have 2 days off in the next few days. So I just finished reading The Lord of the Rings after reading it for a few months of on and off for a while. It took me a long time. It's the largest book I've ever read, and it's also a very different book than what I've ever read before. I'll talk about that towards the end. So I'll break this video up into 4 parts, one for each book, and final thoughts as well. So, without any further ado, let's get on into it with The Lord of the Rings, beginning with The Fellowship of the Ring. Alright, so the first book of the Lord of the Rings trilogy is starting off with The Fellowship of the Ring. I definitely understood from the beginning of just how slow and methodical the pacing of this whole entire trilogy was from the get go, with how long we spent building up and world building around the Shire, and all with Bilbo, and how we don't really officially leave the Shire until about 100 or so pages into the Fellowship of the Ring. Overall, I feel like the pacing started to pick up a little bit whenever we meet Strider, aka Aragon. And after that, it picked up a little bit. I do love the adventures of the Fellowship of the Ring nonetheless, but it was a little bit boring with all the adventure and stuff and not nearly that much action for me. Um, Overall, and also my favorite part was once they got to the Elrond Castle. I mean, Council. Why did I say castle? Once they got to the council part of it, I felt like the pacing definitely picked up there, and that it was a much wonderful conversation and dialogue filled festival, and it was a wonderful break from all the walking and adventure up to that point. Ultimately, I rate the Fellowship of the Ring a 3.75 out of 5 stars. And that's mostly just because of how slow it was up from the beginning to leaving the Shire, and then from there until we meet Strider, and then it kind of slows down again, and then it picks up pretty much when when Frodo gets like injured and stuff, and then we kind of get over to the elves' place, and then we get the council, and then it pretty much picks up from there. And that's pretty much my favorite bit of the Fellowship of the Ring. I feel like I really do feel like we could have ended the Fellowship of the Ring by just expanding the council a little bit and just ending it just after there. I get why we didn't. And so after there, the adventures continue. I feel like the council could have been longer, or at least that kind of part of the book could have been longer overall. Then once we continue, we get the question mark of the fact that Gandalf potentially sacrificed himself, and then the whole incident with Boromir, and ultimately the Fellowship splitting into two paths, which was ultimately good overall. Just overall, I feel like the slowness of it was just a bit much in this book, and I feel like it wasn't as slow in the rest of the books, even though it was more or less the same of We Walk for most of the entire trilogy. So now, the Two Towers. So the Two Towers was a bit faster and a little bit better than the Fellowship of the Ring. Suppressing a yawn. And so overall, the book, the book of the Two Towers, which really this was all one big book that I read it from for the most part, because it was the big like I don't know what to call it, but the big large book or whatever tome, big like a tome or whatever like that. or grimoire or memoir, long, big books. But overall, The Two Towers was a lot better of a book than The Fellowship of the Ring. I'm sure if I reread The Lord of the Rings in a few years, I'll definitely enjoy it more. But The Two Towers was an improvement. The walking did continue. My favorite part about this book was whenever Frodo and Samwise started adventuring with Gollum. I feel like even though that was pretty much the same adventuring and walking, that the Gollum part just made it go lightning fast and easier to read. Also, the adventures with Merry and Pippin and the trees was fun. And then also, it was the first half of the book, which I believe is just pretty much strictly Strider or Aragorn. Man, it's two. It's not even two. Strider. Well, Aragorn. I keep on saying Strider because that's easier to say. Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas. Ultimately, Gandalf comes back. I feel like that part of the book until we meet others others from Minas Tirith, from with the likes of where Boromir was from and stuff like that. I feel like until we get there, it's a very slow and methodical way of getting there, and I feel like that's pretty much the weakness of the Two Towers. And then whenever we get to Gollum with Sam and Frodo, it improves leaps and bounds, and it's much easier to read. I guess just because it's just very interesting with Gollum, with Sam and Frodo. Ultimately, this book is an improvement over the Fellowship, not by too much, so which is why I rated it 4 stars out of 5. And so now, The Return of the King, the best book of the trilogy, and rightfully so. So now, as we finish up the trilogy, we get to The Return of the King, which kind of switches on the stigma of the first two books because the Elrond Council pretty much occurs at the end of the first half or a little into the second half of the Fellowship of the Ring. Why am I tired? Of the Fellowship of the Ring, and the Gollum, Frodo, and Sam adventure is in the second half, but we get the final climactic and ultimate battle against pretty much all of evil with Faramir, Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, Aragorn, and many others, all in the first half. And the second half is actually slower, even though it has Frodo, Gollum, and the ultimate part with the ring. I found that to be a good bit slower. Overall, this book is the best of them all. It's not a 5 star, it's a 4.5 for me. I'm sure I will grow to love this trilogy more and more in the future. The Return of the King is a wonderful, wonderful book and a wonderful conclusion to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Just it's just a different type of book overall from modern books. In it, that the climactic battle happened pretty much to where another another 100 to 200 pages still happened after that, and that was a little bit weird for me. That's one of the reasons why it's not quite a 5. Also, the fact that Frodo, Sam, Gollum, and all that just wasn't quite as easy to read as it was in the Two Towers. That as well. That's pretty much my only complaints about the whole book. And next up, some final thoughts before a preview of the next book video. So, some final thoughts and a little something else after this before the end of this video. So, when, not if, but when I do ultimately read The Lord of the Rings again, probably in about 2 to 3 years or something like that, I will definitely not be reading from this big old tome of the book. Though it is a wonderful edition of the whole series, I'll definitely be picking up each of the 3 different and separate books individually, so that'll probably be easier to read overall. And I have no clue when I would reread this, but I do hear to reread this sometime in the near future after you've read a good bit more. I have been reading for a few years, but this is the most different book I've ever read. And so, final thoughts. One, I found Gollum's death to be hilarious. Someone said in some type of thread that I was doing that they've never heard of that and that it was weird. But I found Gollum's death to be funny. Um, now that I think about the walking, the best way to describe to this to someone else is A, going blind, or B, we walk is the biggest summarization of this whole book. It is 90% walking, 10% everything else. But overall, this was a great and wonderful read. It wasn't the best trilogy I've ever read, but it was a good trilogy nonetheless. I can't really give a ranking on trilogies yet. I've only really read about 3 or 4 trilogies in total. But now, on to the preview of the next book video and the outro combined with it. All right, so I have this big stack of books right here. It's about 12 books right now. And I'll give a quick preview over all of the books where I'll give a full video on them next week. I am over halfway through and will be finishing sometime in the next couple of days. Stephen King on writing. I am writing a book, or well, a series of books, and I want to write a whole universe. And so I thought to read a writing book on the craft by Stephen King to help me along this journey. And so, yep. He also advises in writing to also always be reading. These next 3 books, The Arthurian, Scottish, and Celtic Myths. I am writing a Arthurian based series of books within the universe I'll be writing. And so these popped my eye whenever I was at a bookstore just a few weeks ago. And so they just really popped my eye and I thought to grab them. This to help with Arthur stuff and also just to mix in some other mythos and mythologies in with it as well. We got Project Hail Mary, watched it in theaters. I planned to read this before the movie came out, but Lord of the Rings, English, The Lord of the Rings ended up taking quite a while to read, and I just wasn't as studious to read as I should have been. We got The Brothers Hawthorne, The Grandest Game, and Glorious Rivals. This is the next set of books within the Inheritance Games series. The Inheritance Games is a trilogy, one of my favorite trilogies so far. And so the Brothers Hawthorne focuses on Jameson and Grayson Hawthorne and a standalone um adventure away from the Inheritance Games. And then this is the next 2 books of the new trilogy within this. All right, and now we have critique of pure reason, a philosophical book, and I want to get more in depth into philosophical books. And so, while I was hanging out with one of my friends, I saw this on his bookshelf, and it piqued my interest, and so I put it on my wish list. I got it for my birthday. The Kaiju Presentation Society by John Scalzi. I have no clue what this is about. I just saw Kaiju and I got interested. We have a small book, The Spiritual Warfare, a Christian book. I got this from a friend's mother one time. Haven't read it yet. That's all. Then we have the James Code. I believe this is to help decode or to help understanding the book of James or just other principles to add onto it as well. I did that. This is supposed to be about 10 books, but Stephen King one will definitely be done by the time next book video comes out next week. on July 4th. And so each of the myth books are about 250 pages, and they're also just smaller overall. So I might just finish those lightning fast. And so we may see more books than just those. And so expect a slightly more in depth understanding of these books in the next video and reviews about them in the near future. So that is all I have for you today. Hope you like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Comment below your thoughts on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'd love to talk to you about the trilogy and what your response to my thoughts is about the video. And so, hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. Thank you all for the support. Let's get to 20 subscribers. Goodbye. God bless you all. Have fun.